Tides of Time, Navigating Love's Journey. A Shoeshine's Timeless Tales creation. Our videos are for entertainment purposes only. Any similarity of characters to real-life people or situations is strictly coincidental. The December wind howled like a banshee, whipping against the frosted windows as Jake fumbled with his keys. He pushed open the creaking door, expecting the usual warm embrace of home. The comforting hum of the oven, the scent of Lily's lavender perfume, and the soft glow of lamplight spilling from the living room. Instead, a thick silence pressed against him, the air heavy with an unsettling tension. This wasn't just the usual post-work silence, the kind that settled like a comfortable blanket after a long day. This was an oppressive silence, one that scraped at his nerves and set off alarm bells in his gut. He flicked on the entryway light, its pale glow barely illuminating the cavernous living room. No fire crackled in the hearth. No enticing aromas drifted from the kitchen. Just a gnawing emptiness that echoed the hollowness in his chest. "Lily?" Jake called out, his voice tinged with a hope he barely dared to believe in. He stepped forward, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the silence. The air grew colder, prickling his skin like icy needles. He found her in the kitchen, hunched over the island, her back to him. The sight of her sent a jolt of alarm through him. Lily, always meticulously groomed, now had her fiery hair tangled around her face, streaks of mascara smudged into dark war paint on her pale cheeks. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were red-rimmed and raw, staring sightlessly at the untouched plate of dinner on the counter. "Lily?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper, laden with a fear he couldn't articulate. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over her shoulder, unsure of his welcome. She flinched, her shoulders jerking like a startled animal. Slowly she turned, her face a mask of shattered porcelain. The sight of it, the raw pain etched into every line, took Jake's breath away. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. But the question, even as he uttered it, felt inadequate, a paltry offering against the storm brewing in her eyes. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Her lips trembled, tears welling up anew. Then, with a choked sob, she pushed away from the counter and crumpled into his arms. The kitchen table, usually the stage for countless shared meals and whispered secrets, felt like an interrogation room under the harsh overhead light. Lily sat across from him, her once radiant face a canvas of stoic pain. 2 manila envelopes, bulging with unspoken accusations, lay between them like fallen idols. "We need to talk," she said, her voice a husky whisper that scraped against the silence. Jake's fingers itched to touch the envelopes, to tear them open and face the truth they contained, whatever it might be. He reached for one, his hand trembling as he unsealed it. Pictures spilled out, each Polaroid snapshot a shard of his worst nightmare. There he was, arm in arm with Laura, the young firebrand from accounting, her laughter echoing through the silence, a mocking melody to his shame. He'd always dismissed their late-night meetings as harmless, mere extensions of their professional synergy. But these stolen glances, these lingering touches, painted a different story, one he'd refused to see. Shame flooded him, hot and suffocating, turning every excuse to ash on his tongue. He looked at Lily, her eyes reflecting the wreckage of his integrity. The woman he loved, the woman who had been his partner for 25 years, was a stranger now, her silence more potent than any accusation. He stammered, the word a pathetic whimper swallowed by the vastness of his betrayal. Words seemed petty, hollow offerings against the immensity of his transgression. The lies he'd built, the justifications he'd clung to, crumbled to dust with each passing second. Lily remained silent, the only sound the clink of her spoon against the ceramic mug. It was a deafening silence, a void pregnant with unspoken questions. Could their love withstand this earthquake? Could forgiveness bloom from the ashes of his deception? Or was their home, once a haven of shared dreams and laughter, destined to implode under the weight of his actions? The envelopes lay open on the table, each photo a silent accusation. Jake, drained but curious, reached out and picked up one of the Polaroids. "Who sent these?" he asked, his voice low, more a murmur than a question. Lily's eyes narrowed, the pain in them hardening into a steely resolve. Does it matter who sent them, Jake? They're real, aren't they? He stared at the picture, his gaze lingering on Laura's face. Yeah, they're real, he admitted, his voice devoid of the expected remorse. But these are just grainy, he added, holding the photo up to the light as if its quality somehow diminished the truth it held. Lily's outrage flared. Grainy? Jake, we're not talking about the quality of the photos. This is about what they show. Her voice trembled, each word a tiny hammer blow to his already battered conscience. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that sent another wave of hurt crashing over her. Look, it was nothing serious. Just a few harmless flirtations, nothing more. Harmless flirtations? The words hung in the air, heavy with his nonchalant dismissal. Lily's face contorted, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Harmless? You call spending nights with another woman, laughing, touching, flirting, harmless? He looked at her, his eyes devoid of the guilt she expected. We were just colleagues, Lily, nothing more. His voice was flat, devoid of any attempt at apology or explanation. Lily felt a cold emptiness settle in her stomach. The man she loved, the man she'd built a life with, was a stranger now. This wasn't the apologetic, remorseful Jake she knew. This was a man who seemed unconcerned, detached from the earthquake he'd triggered in their lives. You're lying, Jake, she said, her voice a low growl. I know you're lying. And the worst part? You don't even seem to care. He met her gaze, his eyes cold and distant. Maybe I don't, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The air crackled with unspoken words, accusations hanging heavy between them. The photos, once just pieces of paper, had become a mirror reflecting the shattered fragments of their life. In that moment, suspended between denial and despair, Lily knew this was just the beginning of their confrontation. The storm had hit, and she had no idea what the wreckage would look like when the dust settled. Jake's nonchalance had morphed into a chilling indifference, leaving Lily adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. Was this truly the man she loved? As the silence between Jake and Lily stretched into an abyss, the discarded photos on the table lay stark against the pale light, each one a silent accusation. Lily, her eyes red-rimmed and raw, stared at the second manila envelope, its unopened secrets weighing heavily on her. What's in the other one, Jake? She asked, her voice hoarse from the night's emotional roller coaster. Divorce papers? He let out a humorless laugh, a hollow rasp that sent a shiver down her spine. Always so dramatic, aren't you? No, Lily, it's not that. He reached for the envelope, his hand brushing hers briefly before he held it out, a grim offering. Open it then. See for yourself. Lily hesitated, her fingers trembling as she unsealed the envelope. Inside wasn't the legal document she expected, but a single, faded photograph. It was her, years younger, her face flushed with youthful defiance, arms wrapped around another man, his lips pressed against hers in a passionate kiss. The air in the kitchen seemed to crackle with a different kind of tension now. The accusatory fire in Lily's eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning horror. Her fingers tightened on the photo, the edges digging into her skin like tiny claws. Where did you get this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake leaned back in his chair, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. Let's just say, some secrets have a way of coming back to haunt you, Lily, just like mine did tonight. The realization slammed into her like a physical blow. Jake knew. He knew about her past, the one mistake she had spent years burying under layers of regret and self-forgiveness. The mistake that had always been the unspoken shadow in their relationship. The anger that had fueled her confrontation ebbed away, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. The tables, it seemed, had turned. The judge had become the accused, the prosecutor the prisoner in her own private court of conscience. So, Jake continued, his voice dripping with a bitter irony, it seems we both have something to confess, don't we? Lily stared at him, her mind reeling. The facade of his indifference, the lack of remorse that had so enraged her, suddenly made terrifying sense. He hadn't been callous. He'd been playing a game, a twisted game of one-upmanship, fueled by his own hidden pain. The confrontation, once a clear path towards truth and consequences, had become a tangled web of secrets and unspoken accusations. The wreckage of their trust, she now realized, was far more extensive than she ever imagined. And the question hanging in the air, Heavier than the morning fog was this. Could their love survive not one betrayal, but two? Lily clutched the faded photograph, its edges digging into her palm like accusing thorns. The room, once a haven of shared laughter and whispered secrets, now echoed with the deafening silence of betrayal, both hers and his. Jake sat across from her, his face a mask of grim amusement. "So," he drawled, his voice laced with a bitter irony, "it seems we both have something to confess, don't we?" Lily's mind reeled, the anger that had fueled her earlier confrontation replaced by a cold, suffocating dread. The facade of his indifference, the lack of remorse that had so enraged her, suddenly made chilling sense. He hadn't been callous. He'd been playing a game, a twisted game of one-upmanship, fueled by a hidden pain of his own. "What do you know, Jake?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed. "Let's just say, some truths, like buried treasure, have a way of being unearthed, Lily. And sometimes," he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "the most valuable treasures are the ones we least expect to find." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The implication hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud threatening to engulf the remnants of their trust. The photos on the table, once stark evidence of his infidelity, now seemed like mere pawns in a larger, more sinister game. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice cracking with a mixture of fear and defiance. Jake's smile was a cruel twist of his lips. "Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his eyes glinting with a dangerous knowledge. "The whispers in the shadows, the secrets that lurk beneath the surface. We both wear masks, Lily, but sometimes the cracks reveal more than we bargained for." His words were like acid, burning through her carefully constructed facade. The past, the one she thought she had buried so deep, was clawing its way back to the surface, threatening to drown her in its murky depths. "I don't know what you think you heard, Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's not what you think." He chuckled, a hollow sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Isn't it? Then perhaps you should refresh your memory, Lily. After all, some memories, like certain photographs, have a way of staying remarkably clear." The photo in her hand, a snapshot of a youthful indiscretion, felt like a dam about to burst. The past, long suppressed, was on the verge of flooding their present, drowning them in a sea of regrets and unspoken truths. "It was Randy Upton," she choked out, the words grating like gravel in her throat. "Years ago, before you, before us." Jake's eyes, narrowed and hard, softened into a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. "Randy Upton," he echoed, the name rolling off his tongue like a bitter pill. "The looser, the one who left you high and dry when his sheriff career took off." Lily flinched, the memory lancing through her like a fresh wound. The shame, the humiliation, the weight of being discarded like yesterday's newspaper. It all washed over her in a wave of nausea. "I never meant for it to happen," she whispered, her voice a broken plea. "It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." He held up a hand, silencing her. "I know, Lily," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I knew about Randy long before these photos surfaced. I found them tucked away in a box, like a forgotten relic of a life we almost lived." Lily stared at him, her heart a hummingbird trapped in her ribs. "You knew? And you never said anything?" He nodded, his face etched with a sadness that mirrored her own. "I chose not to, Lily, because I believed in us, in the foundation we built on truth. I thought that maybe, if we didn't dig up the past, it wouldn't poison the present." His words were a knife to her conscience, twisting in the wound of her deceit. The agreement they'd made, the unspoken pact of honesty that had been the bedrock of their relationship, felt like a crumbling cliff beneath her feet. "But it did, didn't it?" she whispered, her voice thick with despair. "My silence poisoned everything. It festered, a hidden tumor in the heart of our love." Jake reached across the table, his touch hesitant, then withdrew it. "It wasn't just the silence, Lily," he said, his voice low and pained. "It was the breach of trust, the knowledge that I might be building a life on a foundation of sand, that the truth could come crashing down at any moment." His words were a knife to her conscience, twisting in the wound of her deceit. The agreement they'd made, The unspoken pact of honesty that had been the bedrock of their relationship felt like a crumbling cliff beneath her feet. But it did, didn't it? She whispered, her voice thick with despair. My silence poisoned everything. It festered, a hidden tumor in the heart of our love. Jake reached across the table, his touch hesitant, then withdrew it. It wasn't just the silence, Lily, he said, his voice low and pained. It was the breach of trust, the knowledge that I might be building a life on a foundation of sand, that the truth could come crashing down at any moment. His disappointment, sharp and raw, cut deeper than any accusation. The man she loved, the man she'd vowed to be honest with before all else, saw her now not as a partner, but as a builder of sandcastles, fragile and impermanent. The weight of his words settled on her like a shroud, suffocating her with the realization of the damage she'd done. The betrayal, it seemed, wasn't just his, but hers as well. She had chipped away at the cornerstone of their trust, and now the cracks were starting to show. Lily knew their journey had taken a devastating turn. The confrontation, once a battlefield of accusations, had become a shared landscape of regret. The air in the kitchen crackled with a new kind of tension, sharper than the sting of betrayal. Lily's voice, hoarse from the tidal wave of confessions, rose in defense. It wasn't like that, Jake, she insisted, her words stumbling over each other. It wasn't about love or passion. It was loneliness, boredom, a moment of weakness in a life that felt like it was going nowhere. Jake's eyes, once softened with understanding, hardened again. Loneliness? Boredom? He scoffed, his voice laced with a bitter edge. Is that all it was, Lily? A casual fling to spice up a bland menu? A dish on the side while the main course sat cold? His words struck her like a blow to the gut. The justifications she'd built, the flimsy excuses she'd woven, crumbled under the weight of his anger. The affair, once a shameful secret buried in the shadows, now lay exposed under the harsh glare of his scrutiny. It wasn't that simple, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Things were different back then. We were young, lost, searching for something we couldn't find in each other. And what about now, Lily? Jake countered, his voice rising, echoing off the bare walls of the kitchen. When was the moment you decided to stop searching, to stop talking, and choose secrecy over honesty? When did you decide to make decisions for both of us? Decisions that shattered the very foundation we built our lives on. His words were a mirror reflecting the ugly truth. She had not only betrayed his trust, but she had usurped his agency, treated him like a child to be shielded from the storm she had brewed. The shame of her actions washed over her in a wave, leaving her breathless and exposed. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely a whimper. I thought it was better to protect you, to keep the past buried. Jake threw his hands up in exasperation. Protect me? From what? From the truth? From the right to know the woman I shared my life with? The woman I built a family with? His words hit her like a physical blow. Their children, their precious, trusting children, raised on the very values of honesty and responsibility she had so brazenly disregarded. The hypocrisy, the stark contrast between their teachings and her actions, felt like a betrayal of their very beings. We taught them to be open, to communicate, to face their mistakes, Jake continued, his voice thick with emotion. And here we are, drowning in our own secrets, afraid to face the consequences of our choices. What kind of example are we setting for them, Lily? What kind of foundation are we building for our family? Jake's voice, laced with a cutting edge of accusation, sliced through the silence, each word a shard of pain lodged in Lily's heart. Remember Riley's science fair project? He asked, his eyes narrowed. The one about honesty and the domino effect? How one small lie can topple a whole chain of trust. Lily's throat constricted. Riley, their bright, inquisitive daughter, who had held up a mirror to their values with her innocent project. A project now serving as a cruel reminder of Lily's own transgressions. It was different, Jake, she stammered, her voice weak, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his unwavering gaze. Was it? He challenged, his voice rising. Was it different when you lied to her about the broken vase, the one she confessed to despite the fear of punishment? Was it different when you taught her the importance of taking responsibility, even for the hardest choices? Lily flinched, each memory a fresh wound. The lessons they had instilled in their children, the lessons they had held dear, now stood against her like accusing angels, their faces etched with the disappointment she felt mirrored in Jake's eyes. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice cracking with shame. The justifications she had clung to, the flimsy excuses she had built, dissolved into dust under the harsh glare of his scrutiny. You hid your truth, Lily, Jake continued, his voice tight with suppressed fury. You built a fortress of silence around your mistake, while preaching honesty to our children. You made decisions for both of us, robbing me of the right to face the truth, to choose my own path. His words were a scalpel, dissecting the hypocrisy that festered at the core of her actions. The contrast between their expectations for their children and Lily's own choices was stark. A chasm they had unwittingly created, a chasm that threatened to swallow their entire family whole. I was protecting you, she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. I didn't want to hurt you, to break what we had. But you did, Lily, he said, his voice low, heavy with sorrow. You broke our trust, our foundation. You turned us into strangers living under the same roof, strangers with secrets that festered in the shadows. The pain in his voice, the raw vulnerability it exposed, was the final blow. Lily's heart ached for him, for the hurt she had inflicted, for the trust she had betrayed. The confrontation, once a battle for individual vindication, had become a brutal mirror reflecting the wreckage of their shared lives. Lily, her face etched with the raw pain of self-discovery, struggled to find her footing on the shifting sands of their shattered trust. Each accusation from Jake landed like a blow, exposing the hypocrisy that had festered beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. You preached honesty to our children, Lily. Jake's voice cut through the heavy air, laced with a bitter edge of disbelief. You built a pedestal of integrity, a monument to the truth, and then you stumbled off your own creation. Lily flinched, the weight of his words crushing her. Riley's science project, a colorful display of dominoes depicting the domino effect of dishonesty, flashed in her mind like a mocking reminder. She had instilled those values, nurtured them in their children, yet here she was, the architect of a house built on lies, a testament to her own spectacular fall from grace. I was protecting you, she whispered, her voice a desperate plea for understanding. I couldn't bear to see you hurt. Jake scoffed, a humorless sound that sent shivers down her spine. Protecting me? By taking away my choice. By weaving a web of deceit that suffocated our truth. You didn't protect me, Lily. You imprisoned me in your own self-serving version of reality. His words were a cold knife twisting in her gut, exposing the selfishness that had fueled her actions. The justifications she had clung to, the flimsy excuses she had built, crumbled like sandcastles under the relentless waves of his doubt. But what about their mistakes? He pressed, his voice rising with a touch of righteous anger. Did you shield them from the consequences of their choices, Lily? Did you wrap them in cotton wool and whisper sweet lies when they stumbled? Or did you, like any good parent, hold them accountable, guide them through the messy path of responsibility? Lily's silence was a deafening answer. The contrast, stark and undeniable, hung heavy in the air. She had preached accountability, demanded honesty, and yet, when it came to herself, she had chosen the path of convenience, the cowardly cloak of secrecy. I don't know what to say, she stammered, tears blurring her vision. The ground beneath her seemed to cave in, leaving her adrift in a sea of regret and self-loathing. Jake, his face etched with a mixture of disappointment and a strange, almost mournful understanding, reached out a hesitant hand. But she couldn't meet his touch. Not yet. The chasm that had opened between them felt too wide, the air too thick with unspoken truths. The confrontation, though brutal in its honesty, was just the first tremor in a long earthquake. The foundation of their lives, built on the shaky ground of secrets and half-truths, had been irrevocably shaken. Lily knew the journey ahead would be arduous, paved with thorns and tears. Suspended between devastation and hope, the future, once a bright tapestry woven with dreams and promises, now hung before them like a tattered flag, its colors faded, its threads frayed. The silence pressed down on them, a suffocating blanket woven from unspoken apologies and the bitter sting of betrayal. Jake's voice, raw and laced with a weariness that mirrored Lily's own, broke the suffocating quiet. Divorce, he rasped, the word hanging heavy in the air like a death knell. I thought about it, Lily. Thought about it every night. The image of a life without you, a bitter pill I choked down with every sunrise. Lily flinched, the stark reality of his words slicing through the haze of her self-pity. Divorce, the ultimate symbol of failure, the death of the dreams they had woven together, loomed large, a chilling prospect that sent shivers down her spine. But it's not that simple, Jake continued, his voice hoarse. The lawyers, the division of assets, the fight for custody, a war we'd wage on the backs of our children, leaving them casualties in our shattered love. And then there's the money, Jake added, his voice laced with a bitter laugh. The house, the college funds, the comfortable life we built, all reduced to a pile of ashes, leaving me with a pittance and the ghosts of a life I can no longer afford. He spoke of practicality, of logistics, but his words painted a picture of emotional bankruptcy, of dreams sacrificed on the altar of betrayal. Lily knew he wasn't just talking about the financial strain, he was mourning the loss of a future they had envisioned, a future that now lay in smoldering ruins. The truth, Lily, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I found it in the cold digital silence of your phone. Emails, texts, traces of stolen moments hidden in the shadows of your digital life. I tracked him down, watched him from afar, a ghost haunting the life you built with me. Even the kids. I had them tested, he admitted, his voice cracking. A father's desperate act of self-preservation, clinging to the last shreds of his shattered world. The results, Lily? They were the only confirmation I needed. The weight of his words, the raw vulnerability he exposed, left Lily speechless. He hadn't just been hurt by her betrayal, he had been broken, his very sense of identity shattered by the possibility that his children, the fruits of their love, might not even be his. The air, once thick with the tension of confrontation, now hung heavy with the weight of a new understanding. Jake's voice, low and gravelly, broke the fragile silence, his words echoing through the desolate landscape of their shattered trust. Do you know what it's like, Lily? He asked, his voice tight with a barely suppressed tremor. To wake up every morning with a heart that feels like a lead weight in your chest? To look at the woman you love, the mother of your children, and see a stranger cloaked in familiar skin? Lily flinched, the raw pain in his voice a physical blow. The image of him, the man who had always held her hand through life's storms, now drowning in the ocean of her deceit, tore at her soul. She had betrayed his trust, his love, but in that moment, the true scope of her transgression hit her like a tidal wave. Every smile, every touch, Jake continued, his voice hoarse, became a potential lie. Every whispered conversation, a possible secret. You turned my life into a minefield, Lily, a constant barrage of doubt and suspicion that chipped away at the very core of who I was. His words were a scalpel, dissecting the layers of her self-deception. She had built a fortress around her secret, convinced it would shield him from the pain, but in reality, she had built an impenetrable wall, isolating him within a prison of her own making. His love, once a source of comfort and strength, had become a chain, binding him to a woman he no longer recognized. I never meant to hurt you, Lily stammered, her voice choked with tears. The image of Jake, the man who made her laugh, the one who held her close in the darkest nights, now haunted by her deceit, was a torment she couldn't bear. But you did, Lily, he whispered, his voice catching. You hurt me in ways you can never imagine. You stole my sense of security, my faith in our love, my belief that the woman I married was someone I could trust with my closed eyes. His words were a mirror, reflecting back the devastation she had wrought, the justifications she had clung to, the flimsy excuses she had built, crumbled to dust under the weight of his honesty. The protection she offered had suffocated him, the secrecy she nurtured had poisoned their love, and the lies she whispered had become the venomous thorns that pricked at his heart every waking moment. You talk about trust, Jake, she said, her words laced with a bitter edge. About how I shattered your world. But what about yours? What about the late-night calls, the hushed conversations, the sudden trips you wouldn't explain? Don't you dare try to turn this around, Lily. My coping mechanisms, my indiscretions, were never a conscious betrayal. They were a desperate attempt to find solace in the darkness you cast over our marriage. So it's okay for you to seek comfort elsewhere? Lily challenged, her voice rising with a tremor of hurt and indignation. To find solace in the arms of another while The words caught in her throat, choked by a sob that she swallowed with a dry cough. The hypocrisy she saw in him, the double standards she perceived, fueled her anger, a desperate attempt to deflect the scorching heat of her own guilt. "No, Lily," Jake said, his voice firm, but his eyes betraying a flicker of pain. "It wasn't okay. It was never okay. But it wasn't a betrayal of our vows, of our love, of everything we built together. It was a desperate scramble for light in the suffocating darkness you created." His words hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to her accusations. He admitted to seeking solace, to finding temporary escape in the company of others, but he drew a sharp line between his actions and her deliberate deception. His was desperate grasping for air in a suffocating relationship. Hers, a calculated act of infidelity that had ripped the very fabric of their lives. The morning light, filtered through the kitchen window, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next blow to fall in this already battered landscape. Lily, her face a canvas of dawning understanding, watched Jake, his features etched with the raw pain she had unwittingly inflicted. "Do you think it was easy, Lily?" he rasped, his voice cracking with a vulnerability she hadn't witnessed before. "Do you think I found joy in those fleeting moments of escape, in the arms of strangers who couldn't hold a candle to the woman I love? It was torture," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "To love you, to build a life with you, and yet, to feel like I was drowning in a sea of your silence, your secrets. The anger, Lily, it was a burning ember in my gut, fueled by the betrayal, the shattered promises." Lily felt a cold dread creep up her spine. The anger she had seen in him before, the icy accusations, now seemed like a mere flicker compared to the inferno that raged beneath the surface. She had betrayed his trust, his love, and in doing so, she had unwittingly wounded him in ways she could never have imagined. "But then I'd see you," he said, his voice catching. Smiling at the kids, laughing over dinner, and the anger would recede, replaced by a love so fierce, so overwhelming, that it almost suffocated me. His words were a mirror reflecting the turmoil within her own heart. The love she had taken for granted, the trust she had so carelessly shattered, now loomed large, a monument to her folly. She had built a prison of secrets, thinking it would protect him, but all it had done was trap him in a cage of her own making, a cage where love and resentment waged a constant, brutal war. The bitter echoes of their clash hung heavy in the air, like smoke clinging to the aftermath of a fire. Their breakfast sat untouched, silent witness to the emotional carnage left in the wake of Lily's confession. Jake, his jaw clenched tight, spoke first, his voice a low rasp like sandpaper grating against raw flesh. "At first," he said, "I tried anger, channeled it into work, pushed myself to the limit until my muscles screamed and my bones ached." Lily watched him, her heart twisting in her chest. His words painted a portrait of a man desperately clinging to normalcy, trying to drown the pain in the roar of productivity. "But it wasn't enough," he continued, his voice catching. "The nights, they were the worst. The silence became deafening, and every corner of the house seemed to echo your absence." His confession, raw and unfiltered, cracked open a new layer of his pain. Lily reached out, her hand trembling as it sought his, but he flinched, the touch an unwanted brand on his wounded skin. "Don't," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Don't try to make it okay, because it's not. It's hell, Lily. Living with the ghost of your betrayal, with the knowledge that the woman I love, the mother of my children, built a world of lies right under my nose." His words were a slap, each syllable reverberating through the hollowness she felt within. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the lines of his face, but he remained an unreadable statue, his pain a wall she couldn't breach. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, the words inadequate, flimsy offerings against the towering inferno of his hurt. "I never meant to cause you this much pain. You what, Lily?" he interrupted, his voice a bitter echo. "What were you thinking? Did you honestly believe you could waltz back into my life, confess your little transgression, and everything would be sunshine and rainbows again? His disbelief mirrored her own. The naivety she had clung to, the foolish hope that forgiveness was a simple flick of a switch, now lay shattered at their feet. Their relationship, once a vibrant kaleidoscope of love and laughter, was now a fractured mosaic, each piece jagged and irreconcilable. "No," she whispered, the truth twisting in her gut like a barbed wire coil. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please let me try. Let me show you." He cut her off, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Show me what, Lily? That you can be different? That you can suddenly become the woman I thought you were after spending years playing a charade?" His words stripped her bare, leaving her exposed and raw. The justifications she had rehearsed, the explanations she had meticulously crafted, crumbled to dust. In his eyes, she saw not just anger, but a profound disillusionment, a death knell to the love they once shared. The air, thick with unspoken words and the weight of revelation, hung heavy between Lily and Jake. He had laid bare his pain, the raw, unfiltered agony of her betrayal, and now his voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. He spoke of his own transgressions. "Allie," he said, the name a foreign word in the once familiar landscape of their marriage. "That was her name, the woman I sought solace in after your world crumbled mine." Lily's breath hitched, a shard of ice piercing her heart. The possibility, the suspicion now solidified into a painful certainty. This woman, this Allie, had been the silent witness to his torment, the temporary escape from the suffocating darkness she had cast. "Solace?" she echoed, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "You call that solace, Jake? While I was..." He held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't," he said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "Don't try to equate what I did with your deliberate deception. My escapades were a desperate gasp for air, a drowning man clinging to a flimsy raft. Yours was a calculated betrayal, a choice made with cold, callous intent." His words were a blow, each syllable a fresh wound. He wasn't condoning his actions, wasn't painting himself as the righteous victim. He was simply stating the stark difference between their choices, the chasm that separated a desperate coping mechanism from a premeditated act of infidelity. Lily felt tears prick her eyes, blurring the lines of his face. Shame, a searing ember in her gut, threatened to consume her. His pain, his anger, were justified, reflections of the devastation she had wrought. Her justifications, her flimsy excuses, seemed pathetic in the face of his raw honesty. I never meant to hurt you," she stammered, the words hollow and inadequate. I couldn't face the truth. He cut her off, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "The truth? You still haven't faced the truth, Lily. You haven't owned your choices, haven't grappled with the consequences of your actions. You're drowning in self-pity, clinging to apologies that ring hollow in the face of the wreckage you've created." The twilight draped the kitchen in a melancholic hue, mirroring the deepening shadows in Lily and Jake's hearts. His revelation, the admission of his own infidelity, hung heavy in the air, a bitter counterpoint to her own confession. Yet, the fragile truce it had forged was now on the precipice of shattering. "Tell me, Lily," Jake's voice rasped, the question emerging from the wreckage like a shard of glass. "If the roles were reversed, if it were I who played in the forbidden shadows, how would you have reacted?" His question, a poisoned barb dipped in the acid of his pain, pierced through Lily's carefully constructed defenses. She flinched, the hypothetical scenario a mirror reflecting the distorted image of her own actions. Could she, with a clear conscience, demand the forgiveness she had so readily denied him? Silence, heavy and suffocating, settled between them. Each tick of the clock echoed the pounding of her guilty heart. The justifications she had clung to, the self-pity she had wallowed in, now seemed obscene in the face of his raw vulnerability. I don't know," she stammered, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. The truth, stark and undeniable, stared back at her from the depths of his hurt eyes. She didn't know. She hadn't considered his pain, his feelings, his perspective. The consequences of her actions had been a distant abstraction, a hypothetical storm brewing across someone else's horizon. "Don't know?" he scoffed, his voice laced with a bitter amusement. "Is that the best you can offer? Ignorance as your sole defense? A convenient amnesia when it comes to my emotions?" It's not that," she whispered, her voice choked with a sob. "It's just, I was so focused on my own pain, on the guilt, on the fear. I never stopped to think about how it would hurt you." Her confession, raw and unfiltered, hung in the air, a fragile offering on the altar of his anger. Yet it did little to quell the storm raging within him. "Never stopped to think," he echoed, his voice a low growl. "As if that excuses your actions, as if minimizing my pain makes it somehow disappear. You built a kingdom of lies, Lily, and you expected me to simply accept it as a minor inconvenience?" His words were a blow, stripping away the last vestiges of self-deception. She had not just betrayed his trust. She had trampled on his dignity, belittled his emotions, and treated him like a character in a play she alone controlled. The silence that followed was pregnant with the weight of their newfound understanding. The path ahead, once shrouded in the fog of accusations and justifications, now lay bare, a desolate landscape paved with the thorns of regret and the seeds of a possible, yet uncertain, redemption. In Part 2, we will witness Lily's struggle to atone for her sins, her journey towards self-forgiveness, and Jake's arduous trek through the labyrinth of his own anger and resentment. Will they find the strength to forgive each other, to rebuild the trust they so ruthlessly demolished? Stay tuned, dear listener, and let the story continue to unfold, etching a poignant portrait of love's fragility and the resilience of the human spirit. Please stay tuned for Part 2. If you like the story, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.